Good morning and welcome to PAC's Digital Health Series. This is the first of our program year. I'm Dean Miller, the President and CEO of PAC, and I want to welcome you to this virtual event. We could not do what we do without great support, and I want to first recognize and thank our sponsors, BlankRome, Independence Blue Cross, and Duane Morris. This morning's program is focused on digital disruptors, and we have some incredible examples of that. But as a reminder, you are muted. Please ask questions. You can use the comments box to be able to do that. The program will go to about 9:35, and then you'll be directed to subject-specific roundtables. We'll share those topics with you so that you can participate. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator this morning, and that is Kevin Brophy. Kevin is a principal at SAP in the life sciences space, focusing on data science, and he's going to help introduce the rest of our panel. With that, let me turn it over to Kevin. Welcome.
Dean, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, and I do have the benefit on a day-to-day basis working with a lot of leading-edge companies with new science and technology. So very excited for this morning with our Digital Disruptor series, and as Dean said, we have some really interesting companies here and folks to talk about what they're doing. So at this point, let's introduce them. Hey, Dwight, you want to introduce yourself and tell us about Quil?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Dwight Raum, and I'm Chief Digital Officer for Quil. That kind of combines the CTO role and the Chief Product role. Prior to Quil, I was at Johns Hopkins for 20 years, where I served a large part of that time as Chief Technology Officer. So Quil Health is an age-in-place company, and let me explain that a little bit further. When you look at the demographics of the US, we have over 10,000 individuals turning 65 or older every single day. So there's this tidal wave of older Americans in this country. And when you look at the spend of healthcare, it's heavily shifted towards end of life and later in life. Yet when you talk to most seniors, you talk to your parents or you talk to your grandparents, many of them want to age in place. They want to stay at home as long as possible before they need to go into senior living. So Quil Health has developed a product that we call Assure. Assure combines ambient sensing from a suite of sensors that we place into seniors' homes. These sensors are very simple. They are basically motion and door sensors, but from that we use machine learning to learn patterns that are in the home. And we combine that with data from wearables and from smart speakers. And together we can really model behaviors in the home. And it gives us a really simple way that's very respectful of their privacy to help a family member who may be remote or an entire family who may be spread across the country to check in on mom or dad and see how they're doing day to day without having to pester them and call them to say, hey, did you take your meds or did you wake up today? Quil and Assure are really the tools that allow us to keep those seniors in their home in a vibrant and active lifestyle for much longer than they would otherwise. And in many ways, this is the next generation of like the I've fallen and I can't get up capabilities. So think about Quil Assure as a way of really empowering individuals, both seniors and their caregivers, to live their best lives.
Terrific. Thank you, Dwight. In this point, David, would you please introduce yourself and your company? Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is David West. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Proscia. A little bit about Proscia. We're a software company that builds tools for pathologists and scientists that work with tissue. If you're say a patient that gets a biopsy, that biopsy is getting sent down to a lab in the basement of a hospital, or maybe a private lab like LabCorp requests hundreds or thousands of miles away, where a pathologist is looking at that tissue on a physical piece of glass under a microscope, kind of like, if you can see my screen, the 1937 Olympus behind me. This technology really hasn't changed in 150 years. It's incredibly subjective. It's based on this brick and mortar model, and yet it touches pathology, touches everything that we do in not just diagnostics, but in how we bring new therapies to market. We build software that helps these laboratories in diagnostic and life sciences settings work with huge images of tissue and to use AI to identify, say, instances of tumor on an otherwise benign slide, something that a pathologist might easily miss or might disagree with their colleague on about the aggressiveness of that cancer. We're about 115-person company based in Philadelphia, but with a team all over the US and in Europe. We're a venture capital backed company backed by a 75 million in capital Series C stage company and growing quickly.
Terrific. Great stuff. Hey, Sean, would you introduce yourself and describe your company?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Sean Maloney. I'm a VP of marketing at Accolade. Prior to Accolade, I had a career all over digital health, from working in hospitals, working for a startup in Microsoft, and also working in the consulting industry in healthcare. What Accolade does is we're a personalized healthcare company. What personalized healthcare is, the best way I can describe it is, if you can think of yourself navigating the healthcare industry as a person, and imagine you got diagnosed with cancer or a family member got diagnosed with cancer, what would you do? A lot of people may, if you have a friend who's a doctor, maybe you call them. Maybe you have a really good relationship with your doctor and they'll help you. But it's kind of a guessing game. Healthcare is a nightmare in this country, and it's really hard for normal people to navigate it. Is your care going to be covered? What doctor should you be going to? Is this doctor good or bad? Can I get an expert opinion? How do you navigate that? And what Accolade does is we use a set of technology. We use mobile apps. We use a digital virtual care service called PlusCare. We use an expert medical opinion service that we purchased called SecondMD. And we help individuals navigate their care and benefits, starting from maybe I need a benefits ID card. Maybe I need a second opinion. Should I go to the ER? I'm not feeling well. All these things are questions that people have every day and they need to navigate with their family members. And we use data and intelligence and a care team to help really understand the member, understand their needs, try to be proactive at addressing their needs, and really help people navigate the system using a set of technology. So one, they can have a great healthcare experience, but two, for our customers who are typically employers, governments, or even health plans who purchase and provide it to their members, we drive a lot of efficiency. You can imagine if you go to the wrong doctor, it can be a really costly venture. And so by helping people navigate the service, we save companies and our customers a lot of money and deliver a better healthcare experience. That's what Accolade does.
Terrific. Well, we got 3 disruptors here with different types of solutions. So to the panel, let's start out with a couple topics we could talk about. So everybody here is in technology and is a disruptor. So how do we continue to do what you folks are doing, use technology to become a connector versus a barrier? And David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll draw on something that's relevant to our business that I think has broader implications in trends in healthcare. And when we look at pathology, it's been based on this brick and mortar model and is very siloed as such. So if you're a patient in let's say Nebraska, and you have melanoma, or what you think is melanoma, you're getting whatever access to whatever pathologist happens to be in your backyard. And the opportunity to use software or digital broadly is a way to break the constraints of physical brick and mortar models and better connect patients with, in this case, the right expert subspecialist pathologists for them. So I think those are sort of the foundational opportunities to leverage technology to to better connect this universe. I hope that gets to the question that you were asking.
It does. It does. Dwight, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Quil is a direct-to-consumer company, and we are very much in, trying to understand our market and our customers and how to reach them most effectively. And it ultimately comes back down to the value story that you tell. And I think the way you do that is you orient around understanding the customers, understanding the features that they want, and putting it into terms that they can understand. Articulating the value message is really important. When you look at healthcare more broadly, that's been one of the largest challenges all along, whether it's access to care or finding the right professional to go see, the right specialist to go see, or for that matter, just how disjointed the healthcare experience is. When you think about how we transform healthcare going into the future, I really believe it does draw more heavily on consumer experience, trying to draw really the best from consumer experience, but then also being very respectful of the trust relationship that we have with patients as healthcare providers. When you think about how care is delivered, trust is really one of the major currencies of how care is effectively delivered. I think we try to combine the best of what consumer experience looks like with a respect for trust and transparency, and combine that to really transform the way we deliver care going forward.
Terrific. Terrific. Sean, how about a comment from you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So one of the challenges with what we do is that, access to care is such a challenge, right? And so the way, if you use typical technology approaches to serve people around their healthcare, like using bots, like a bank, and they're like, how can I help you today? Like a mobile app. Healthcare is such a personal experience that doesn't always work. It's automatically exclusionary. And so one of the things we've built with our foundation, and one of the things we always think about, is how do we really combine people and technology? How do we help technology help our people do their jobs better, rather than putting technology as a replacement or a blocker in the system? The great example is how do when one of our health assistants who are on the other end of the phone to help our members, how do we help them use data to help understand who's on the other end of the phone? Maybe we already know from our data that they're diabetic, and so we need to address this certain need. Or maybe we know that they're a single parent and they have maybe logistical barriers to care. Maybe we have some clinical intelligence that says, you know what, the best thing for this member to do right now is to make sure that their blood sugar is under control. So helping our people do their job and be human, so humans can be humans, technology can kind of empower them. It's such an important part of kind of connecting it and using technology as kind of a connector, rather than being something that makes care a little bit more exclusionary.
Terrific. Terrific. Because when we talk about all of these, all your points of view, it really points to one thing, and that medicine is evolving into an information age, which is some other things we can talk about later that it brings to bear. But Sean, starting with how about a comment from you on this whole evolution of medicine into an information age?
Yeah, the thing that kind of immediately comes to mind is medicine. The information age would move a lot faster if medicine would get out of if I would say legislation, payment systems, and everything else would catch up. It's when I think about the pandemic that's happened over the past 3 years, right? We had more innovation in telemedicine and payment reimbursement technology because we had to, right? If that didn't happen, that never would have happened. The ability to get reimbursed for a typical telemedicine visit would be as constrained as it was 5 years ago. And so, technology wants to move fast, but healthcare, and specifically healthcare in the United States, slows it down pretty considerably. I think there's been a lot of learning over the past 3 years about what can happen when you open up and you let legislation kind of support evolution. It's amazing some of the things that have happened.
Terrific. Dwight, how about comment from you on medicine evolving into an information age?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I would argue that we've been in a data age where we just have raw signal for probably 30 or 40 years. And it just really ballooned, I would say, in the last 30 years with imaging, digital imaging, the onset of digital imaging, whether it was pathology or radiological. The challenge of that is, how do you make intelligent insights from this vast quantity of data? And remember that the people, the practitioners of medicine, whether it's the specialist or the generalist or nursing providers or affiliated providers, they're just people. And when you start to overwhelm them with data and not effective information, I think in many ways start to discount the value of what that story could be told, and really informing the decisions that are being made. So, I think, everything that Sean said around payments and trying to drive reform in healthcare, and a lot of the bureaucracy and the friction points in the US are absolutely on the money. But there is still a lot of work that can be done within the systems themselves. So you think about the information exchange within a healthcare provider, a large IDN, it's still so far from perfect. We've advanced radically in the last 15 years with the onset of meaningful use, and then recently the Cures Act. We're seeing improved interoperability, but we're still so far away from it really translating data into information and being consumable by our practitioners. So a lot of opportunity there. And I think until we really start to solve that consumer kind of question. Remember, our providers are consumers of data and information as well. And we start to orient around their user experience beyond the EHR, right? Thinking about that in the context of an EHR, but also in the broader context of every other tool that they're touching. I think we'll be facing this challenge for quite some time to come. That's just sort of the technology and data and information challenge. Everything else that Sean mentioned, I think is right on the money too.
Dwight, I totally agree with what you said. And I think if you look at, you mentioned the digitization of radiology, which really manifested, 20 years ago, in like early 2000s. We saw this also with electronic medical records over the past 20 years. A lot of data has been created and it's exploding. When we look at our space in pathology, an image of a glass slide is like 100 times or 1,000 times larger than a radiology image, which proved to be very challenging for the adoption of digital pathology when I first got into this space 5 or 10 years ago, because it was hard from a store and compute standpoint. These were huge images that were expensive to store, hard to manage. If you want to take these images and say stream them over the web to a pathologist's desk, that's hard. It takes sophisticated technology to be able to do that, similar to like what you'd see in satellite imaging. But the world has, I think there's a sort of Moore's law effect that's enabled a continued ballooning of this kind of data. And now we're at the point where the question is, how do we create value from this data? And you're seeing really valuable companies emerge. I think most the one that really caught the attention of investors in this space, like 5 years ago, was Flatiron Health, bought for $2 billion. It was basically taking electronic medical record data and creating a real world insights platform that connected two sides of the healthcare equation between pharma and providers, basically taking data that originated in the provider world and capturing value from pharma for that data. But that takes really sophisticated technology approaches and business models to be able to unlock the value from that data. Otherwise, it's a lot of noise, and we don't have enough people to deal with that in healthcare. Certainly in pathology, there's it's a declining subspecialty. In fact, I think it's the only declining subspecialty of medicine. The pathologist workforce has decreased by almost 20% over the past 10 years, and it continues to decrease. And we don't have enough people to handle all of this data, let alone the diagnostic services needs that are affecting patients today, even on a microscope physical paradigm. I think this is touching much of the rest of healthcare. So we need machines to be able to help us create insights and value from the ballooning data landscape and connect different parts of the healthcare ecosystem.
That's some really good stuff, and it leads me right to, for every single one of us on here, you go to one physician and you fill out this form, you go to another physician and you fill out the form of the same information. Um, and Dave, just great point on sharing. So when you get into sharing, we get into this big hot topic of data privacy.
Yeah.
And we look at data privacy, not only here, we have our regulations, and Europe has their regulations and such. So follow that up, David, with your opinion on privacy, because you've been talking, you get some great points on just the available data and such.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fundamentally the unique challenge of data in healthcare, and really in healthcare in general, is the fact that you're dealing with life and death situation, with very personal human information. That's not like, hey, I happen to linger on this particular ad on my news feed for a little bit longer. It's like you have diabetes or you have whatever, right? And so there's something about healthcare and healthcare data that presents unique challenges. But I think they're very solvable challenges from a privacy, regulatory, technology, and ethics standpoint, for that matter. I think we've seen predicates for this, say, in financial services that have to deal, industries that have to deal with, strict regulations and needs for and unique privacy needs. Healthcare is obviously a different beast, but it's something that we have to think about with a higher bar for privacy that comes with often regulations and landscapes within customer environments for security, whatever that might be, that are unique challenges. But I think this is a solvable problem from a technology standpoint as well. I think there's really interesting, say, we work with a company called Datavan that does tokenization, that helps marry kind of privacy objectives and security objectives with connectivity objectives. How do we link data between different modalities and create a unified patient record while maintaining privacy, patient privacy, and not having to work with or expose identifiable information. So it's a unique challenge, but I think one that's very solvable, and cracking that nut can unlock a lot of value.
Yeah.
If I can just, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to just jump in on that. I think, the health emergency brought on by the pandemic over the last 2.5 years has been sort of almost a college course on data privacy in a lot of ways. You think about COVID testing, immunization, collecting that data maybe statewide, and how powerful that is to guide whether you're going into lockdown, or you're enforcing mask mandates, or what have you. I know in the state of Maryland, we have a health information exchange called CRISP. It's a very complicated acronym. I won't try to explain it, but in any case, that became a really great clearinghouse for public health information and understanding, what the dynamics of the pandemic were, really county by county, and really informed decision-making around, public health controls and interventions that were being deployed. But it also, I think, calls into question, right? What's the balance point between personal privacy and public health? And, I like to think in Maryland, we did it right. And there was a very respectful way of managing the information exchange with the HIE and the providers. And ultimately, it was a win-win for everybody who's a citizen of the state. I think there are many cases, there are, I think in the past, we've certainly had issues where patient data has been misused or not well respected in its use. And playing on David's point, there's sort of the minimum nature of the law that you have to comply with. But I think there's also an ethical duty that we have in industry to really exceed that, right? It's minimum is probably not enough. I think we need to really operate at a higher level and be very respectful, and also thinking about empowering the individual at the end of that patient, at the end of that, to say, you know, how do you want your data managed, and really ensuring that we honor that. Go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
Oh, no worries. It was everything you said is spot on. It's funny, one of the things I think about when I think about privacy and healthcare is, you know, the reason why this is so challenging with healthcare is because, you know, healthcare is all about trust, right? It's about, do you trust your doctor? Do you trust the organization you're working with, right? And trust requires, you know, this idea that requires privacy. The other thing that healthcare works really well, other than that, healthcare works really well with context, right? Knowing who you're serving, where they come from, what disease they've had, what their life context is. And so data really helps solve that. But again, you have this idea of trust and being so center of healthcare. And so those two dynamics are always kind of at play when you think about trust and data. The other point is that it's funny. There was a period of time, probably 10 years ago, where, well, maybe 8 years ago, where you know, healthcare, you know, data started blooming, just like David was saying. And we're like, wow, we're almost at critical mass where we see this opportunity for data sharing and HIEs, and we're like, this is going to happen. But it didn't quite. And the reason why, and a lot of, and everybody works from a different industry, and I'll kind of talk from my health insurance perspective, is because we also had this, it was also bubbled with this period of consolidation, right? You saw organizations like Anthem getting huge, Epic systems in the healthcare, in the hospitals getting huge. And so when you have that rapid consolidation and you have these organizations like, you know, Providence Health and HCSC getting so huge, it kind of slows down the momentum, because the need for these powerful exchanges start to go away when you have these big kind of consolidators. And so we're really going to enter this next challenge of like, okay, we have the infrastructure, we have the data, but now we have, you know, in some markets, 2, 3, 1 or 2 players, and getting them to share data in a complicated legislative world and also a complicated competitive world. I think that's going to be the next great challenge in data sharing and privacy in healthcare, because the incentives for a lot of these organizations have kind of gone away because of the competitive dynamics.
Yeah, on that topic too, I think the other interesting aspect that's kind of in this vicinity is standards. Certainly, we have to deal a lot with this in pathology imaging. Yeah. There's been, you know, a limited number of vendors that are, you know, building the equipment that scans these images in proprietary image formats, right? And you see this like across healthcare, where there's, you know, data that exists in proprietary formats, and then standards can be created to help increase interoperability and access while maintaining certain goals like security and privacy. So like DICOM emerged in radiology, and pathology is now kind of subscribing to a DICOM standard, rather DICOM standards adapting to think about to consider pathology imaging. But standards, I think, are a really important part of the equation here.
That is a very, very good point on the standardization that doesn't exist, right? So it's an area, sounds like, that needs to evolve. Dwight, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think the plumbing of healthcare has really improved. You know, DICOM is certainly a long-standing standard, and, you know, its adoption in radiology has been transformative. And I think obviously in pathology has similar type of impact. Standards like FHIR, though, have really, I think, helped democratize the interoperability of data. And then the Cures Act has really required both providers and payers to open up their APIs. I wouldn't say they're quite as open as I would like them to be yet. They're still being brokered pretty effectively by the EHRs, and you know, characterized in a way that could really dissuade a user from sharing data when it's probably in their best interest to do so. But I think, you know, it is still kind of early days. You know, a lot of institutions are still wrestling. They've met the compliance requirement. They've opened up access to their APIs, their FHIR APIs, but they haven't really understood what the impact of that is yet. And I think we, as on the other side of the table, from a vendor standpoint, are still trying to appreciate how to take advantage of those things. And then going back to that comment earlier around trust in medicine and trust in data, doing so in a way that honors the intent and the best interest of that patient, I think is really critical.
Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And, everybody commented and got on the edge of, it's providing the value, but then proving the value so that whether it's getting payers to pay over another older acceptable therapy, et cetera. Sean, I'll throw that at you to start. It's because you have what you folks do at Accolade is a unique service. So you need to provide that value. So you want some comments on how do we do that? How do we provide value? How do we show whether it's your company trying to prove to an organization that you can really help them, or whether it's one of our other folks here, we'll get to David and Dwight about how do I get payers to get involved in paying for what I'm doing?
Yeah, wow. This is the $1 million question. In the employer space, if you think about employers and payers, value is a really challenging thing, because when you talk about value in healthcare, it's not about, hey, I treated somebody, there's an outcome that I can see today, right? It may be I treated somebody and I've avoided an outcome that could have been costly in the future. And so like when you talk about a patient-to-patient way, like value is really hard to quantify. And yeah, you can get a better picture of it. But I think what it comes down to understanding, at least in our industry, is understanding value is understanding the people that you serve, understanding the work that you do, and then using those two things combined with looking at data in the past and looking at similar patients and looking at similar interventions. If you look at a population of data, you can kind of do a lot of math to say, okay, if we look at a similar person who we treated with a similar intervention, what value did we create with that person historically, and attributing that value to the person that you're treating today? And so it becomes like becomes a data exercise, right? The more data you have, the better idea you have to look at the value that you're creating for the people that you serve. That's one. And then it's about how do you actually one of the exercises that we're really challenging right now is like how do you give that perspective view of value to the people that are actually treating patients? So can you imagine if you're a doctor or if you're a nurse, and you can look and say, hey, treatment A can drive outcome, was likely to drive this outcome. Treatment B is likely to drive this outcome. These outcomes have these different values. And then you can say, you know what? Given all the data that we know about a set of members, and given everything we know about estimated value of what we can do, treatment A is actually the highest value outcome that we can actually do. And so maybe we'll actually try this one first because that's what the data says. And so value is, sort of valued everything and trying to, prove, in order to make sure that we can drive market share and that people can really understand the value that we deliver to patients and to our customers. But it was never really possible to understand value 5 years ago. Now we're getting to the point with the way data is that we can start to understand it. But understanding value is really some of the foundations between like how do we actually start to get better at delivering care, because we can start to estimate what the likely value of the people that we treat is by looking at data and kind of marrying those up with the people that we're treating and all the possible things that we can give to them. And so giving that data to our caregivers is actually where the real power is, if that makes any sense.
That does, especially, yes, as a caregiver, my wife and I, we get it, where you're going with that. Hey, Dwight, how about a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, value in the context of shared risk is really the key here. So when you talk about payers and payer as a market, it's how do you articulate the value to them is very much going to be dollars and cents and utilization management and member outcomes. When you talk about it to a provider, they're very much focused on, what's this going to do to my volumes? What's this going to do to, the services that I provide? And then how am I going to get reimbursed for it? Those are all sort of dimensions that, when brought together, you create this scenario where you can start to appreciate value across the entirety of the chain of care. And I think Medicare has really driven a lot of that. Now, I would argue that a lot of the Medicare measures, there are a lot of really great programs. They're very retrospective, which is fine, especially for now. But as we transition from a data age into an information age, I think it's really important for us to start shifting more towards predictive modeling. And I think taking advantage of some of the advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence going forward could really help that selection process of what you're going to be doing, as Sean was mentioning, and from a care standpoint. From like a Quil health perspective, we're like, as I shared before, direct to consumer, and as we look at the provider and the payer market, the question is very much of how do you create a value story? How do you demonstrate an ROI in improving the caregivers' lives? So if you're caring for an elderly parent and you're missing a lot of work because of that, there is a value story to be told there. Very hard to quantify. So I think at the end of the day, for us, it comes down to how do we tell a story that resonates and then has quantifiable data to back it up.
Terrific. And David, this is very, very big and important for what you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually, there's been on the topic of value, a very interesting kind of development and a high profile story around value, that in the last few days, in Alzheimer's in particular. Biogen recently released some very promising data on a new Alzheimer's drug that shows that demonstrated the drug slows progression of the disease. And the reason why this is interesting is because a few years ago, they had a similar drug that was approved by the FDA, but not approved, not approved by, or rather not approved by payers. Approved is not the right word there. So that's been kind of an interesting development in the story of value. But I think the interesting thing that as it relates to our business that we think about is value across two-sided networks. It's been kind of a newer business model that companies like Flatiron have kind of pioneered in healthcare, whereby basically pharma is footing the bill for provider technology. So Flatiron was essentially like subsidizing the cost of their oncology EMR via their pharma real world evidence contracts. And I think we're seeing these two-sided network business models emerge in healthcare that help unlock that help kind of unlock siloed value within the healthcare ecosystem.
No, very, very, and you bring up Flatiron, an interesting one, right? Because it's Roche who bought them, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a quick question, opinion to all of you on that. So is that a good thing? I mean, from a Roche perspective, I'm sure they think it's a good thing. It's a very, very, very good company. Good thing, bad thing that the drug companies all of a sudden buy that kind of technology. I'll start that with Sean. Tough question.
I had an audio problem. Can you repeat that question again, Kevin?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sean. So David is a really good point, right? So Flatiron being bought by a company like Roche, a great company. Mm-hmm. Good thing, bad thing. Could be a good thing that a manufacturer, drug developer like Roche buys that kind of technology, and then they now, we've been talking about data, privacy, et cetera, and now they have access to all that data.
Oh, wow.
And how do the other, and the point being, right, is you know, do they keep it open so other companies can get the data, et cetera?
Yeah, it's it's one of those things that it creates speed and momentum in the short term, right? In the midterm, it's going to create some pain, right? In the sense that, and this is the way I think about all standards adoption, right? You know, when you have a new technology, or when you have a new consumer technology, new enterprise technology, that's in the hands of a large organization that have lots of data, you have a huge acceleration point, right? Which is great. A lot of things happen there. But in order to kind of to secure that, then there's like this slowdown, right? And then you kind of have this typically like this, what's called legislation and standards time period, right? Where it's like, okay, something was powerful here. Let's figure out a way to make sure we can expand the impact of it. And then it kind of accelerates again, right? And so I think in the long term, I think the benefits will be great. In the short term, it does slow down innovation for the rest of the market. But obviously, I think the long term will likely outweigh the bad, but I guess it remains to be seen. But I guess this is the challenge with consolidation and with powerful players, especially in healthcare, is that in the short term, the benefits go to a really small organization or a small scope. But I think the long term, if standards and legislation work in the way that they have been recently, and that typically they've been successful in kind of opening it up, but there is a little bit of that pause period where it takes a while to get there. I think my colleagues David and Dwight maybe will talk a little bit if it's something similar, but that's typically what we see in any consumer technology, right? You see like, a company like Apple comes out with technology, right? And it accelerates really quickly, then it takes a while for it to get to the point where you adopt standards, and then the rest of the industry catches up. But there is like this stop and start nature of these types of dynamics that I think is in play.
Oh, terrific. Dwight, could you comment?
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree, and maybe I'm a little bit more cynical. I think, we're subject to the ebb and flow of who's in the White House and the policies that they bring forward at any given time. So there are certainly challenges around interoperability that are driven from a government perspective. I think short term, it made a lot of sense, and it probably does drive consolidation in the market, probably is a good offensive and defensive move in the pharmaceutical industry to do that. I question, how effective our policymakers will be in opening up that data. I fear that there's, you start to but about 5 or 10 years ago, there was a lot of activity in patent trolls and trying to control market positioning through portfolios of patents. It's not a stretch to see something like this happening with data as well. So, my concern is that we have effective policy levers to ensure that there isn't a monopoly on data or insights that are derived from that. Again, always remembering data privacy and patient privacy is really central to all of this.
Terrific. And David, you kind of you got us into this topic. You want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to Dwight's point, there's something about healthcare that always seems to like converge to a political question. Like politics comes up a lot in thinking about healthcare challenges in healthcare, whether that's kind of interoperability or the payer landscape, et cetera. And I don't know a whole lot about the particular example of like what happened whenever it was four years ago when Roche bought Flatiron, but I know that Flatiron, even under the Roche umbrella, is supporting an ecosystem of biopharmas that are looking to leverage real world data that originates from the provider space to support the development and access of new therapies. And I think that's generally a good thing for patients, but obviously if Roche has some sort of asymmetries in the market, that can become a bad thing. I think in this particular example, we've really seen a flourishing of new companies that have kind of lived around the real world data and real world evidence ecosystem that the Roche acquisition of Flatiron has sparked. And so there has been a sort of market-driven democratization, really as a product of that instance of consolidation, which I think has been pretty interesting. But I wouldn't be surprised to see kind of more consolidation in that space.
Terrific. Yeah, great. So that's some great opinions and comments. And when we take a look at where everything's going to personalized medicines, right? So over the next X years, we're gonna see more and more. The new therapies are going to be either dosed to the patient level or literally are like the CAR Ts, where we're taking the patient's blood and re-engineering T cells, etc. So just I'll start with Dwight. Where does that go from a standpoint of data importance and just all the topics we're talking about? Is the privacy? You folks have all talking about interoperability and sharing of data, etc.
Well, this could be a topic unto itself for an entire panel.
Exactly.
Sort of,
Yeah.
Just a little bit of background. I was pretty intimately involved with our precision medicine effort at Johns Hopkins Medicine while I was there. And our view of precision medicine was much larger at the time. Our Hopkins view of the precision medicine was much larger than most of the industries. It was well beyond just genomic medicine, and included lifestyle, social determinants of health, and that sort of thing. The reason I raise that is, when we think about personalized therapies, whether it's CAR T or some sort of dosing for an individual. When you look at the actual expense in healthcare, if you ask a payer what their top 5 diseases are, they're not going to be cancer, right? They're going to be congestive heart failure. They're going to be diabetes, COPD. These are principally lifestyle driven diseases, whether it's exposure to environmental factors or diet. These are things that can be managed through behavioral, in a lot of ways, can be better managed through better behaviors, better adherence to care plans. So when I think about precision medicine writ large, genomics certainly plays a large part of that. But when you think about it from an overall value standpoint to the U.S. health system, it's how do you treat chronic diseases, quite frankly. So when I look at where we've seen broad market adoption of big data, traditional big data, it's been in commerce and in the ad markets. So whether it's Google or Facebook, they have essentially built profiles of individuals that have been demonstrably effective at selling more things and converting customers to do things. I believe there's just tremendous opportunity to employ similar types of technologies in healthcare to attack those chronic diseases. And if we open that aperture of precision medicine or personalized medicine to include social determinants of health and behavioral health, we'll likely get more bang for our buck, quite honestly, from a health system wise. And at the end of the day, more than likely, the whole level of wellness in the population will be quite a bit higher than it would be otherwise. Just one other quick fact, which I always found interesting, you look at the US spends more in healthcare per capita than any other country in the world. Yet we are, I think, something like eighth, well, if you will, not number one. So we spend more money than anybody else per capita, and far from number one in terms of overall health. Ultimately, I think it comes down to understanding the individual, understanding them at a genomic level, at a lifestyle level, and treating the whole person.
Yeah. We talked about earlier in the conversation about the kind of noise in the data landscape. There's a lot of data, and the challenge is, like, how do you make sense of that? And those, on the topic of precision medicine, those signals exist. Like we know that the right signals exist within that data, And I think that the challenge going forward as we, the ecosystem of precision medicine continues to flourish is, building the types of technologies that identify those biomarkers, whatever they might be, for in chronic conditions and cancer, et cetera. That's like what we're doing in pathology. We're basically building digital biomarkers that can look for signals in tissue that might determine whether a patient would be a candidate for a particular drug, or whatever that might be. And again, the challenge is making meaning from huge amounts of data. In the case of pathology, 1 billion pixels in a single image, most of which are noise. The vast majority of that information, or rather of that data, is noise.
Yeah. Whenever I think about this topic, I think about one of the things that first got me interested in healthcare. I was in economics in college, and there was this paper that we read that was about variability in healthcare treatment and variability in healthcare outcomes. There was like the idea of tonsillectomies, right? That tonsillectomies, if you look geographically across the US, the rate of tonsillectomies in the 70s was completely driven by, not by demographics of the people, just by location. And it makes you realize that on both ends of the spectrum, healthcare, the human business, you have doctors who are people, who should, a lot of times they're driven by data, but a lot of times they're driven by their people nature and their behavior, their geography, where they were trained, where they grew up, who they're located. Like in a lot of ways, it's a discipline that's driven by the people that are in it, and data will change it over time. And then on the other end, you have people, right? People who they're treating, who are unique and different in their genome, in their background, and their social determinants of health, and their motivators, and their lifestyles. So and so you have people on both ends that make it really hard to do anything really effectively or at scale. And so precision medicine, I think what's really interesting about it, fundamentally, data is what powers it, but it's about addressing both of those factors, right? You have the ability to take a lot of the human element out of the treatment decision, out of the doctor's hands, right? But you still have this idea of personal treatment, but it's about removing some of the variability and looking at being completely data-driven and being like, what is the right treatment for this member when I look at them for who they are and with all the best practices that I know, what's the best treatment for that person. But you can't do that unless you deeply understand that person at a fundamental level, everything about them. And so precision medicine, I think what's so exciting is it's about addressing those two things simultaneously. And that's where the power really comes from. Because healthcare is personal. You can't get away from it. And data doesn't get rid of this idea that healthcare is personal. It really is the idea that it has to kind of address it in a scalable way that allows us to get some predictability out of a system that is, by nature unpredictable, because people are unpredictable.
Yeah, if I could just add one more comment, Sean, I think what you said is absolutely right. I mean, ultimately, medicine is a human game, and you have to navigate that. I think we've all been on the panel here kind of using this differentiation between data and information. I think there's also kind of another level of knowledge and then wisdom. There's actually a model out there that where I think we're all sort of imputing into this conversation. I would say that, from a precision medicine standpoint, we're probably somewhere in that data, information, knowledge spectrum. Very few institutions are actually in the knowledge space. Many are still trying to climb that curve of getting data together and turning it into information. But I don't think there probably are, but I think there are very few out there that have actually entered into the wisdom space and are effectively pulling all that information together, data together into information, and applying knowledge and really wisely treating patients.
I totally agree. And you might even say that the rate of creation of new data is like outpacing our speed at which we can make meaning from that. And that's actually like a pretty good thing. Like generally in the kind of long arc of healthcare technology history, hopefully we will look back and say that we created lots of data, and over time we were able to make meaning from that and democratize that knowledge and wisdom.
Well, it seems that one of the key parts, or let's say the important roles here in consuming and using the data is going to be the physicians. So, and David, I'll start right with you because you are game changing for physicians. So, how do we get physicians to adopt faster, to be willing to be more open, change, et cetera? Because you got to run into issues where there's the gamut of some physicians are open and some aren't. You want to comment on that?
Fundamentally, certainly the challenges that we're dealing with are human challenges. Like at the end of the day, we're a data company, but we are building products that humans use and that are dependent on humans to adopt. In pathology, the pathologists have, especially the ones who are more senior and are decision makers, have spent 40 years perfecting the ergonomic experience of using a microscope. Like they are really, really good at moving physical pieces of glass from a cardboard box onto the slide tray, moving it around in very, fine finger movements, putting that off and writing a report. To say that, hey, we're going to move you to an image-based system is a big leap for them. It sounds like silly and small for us who, are kind of fluent in technology, but this is their job. They do it 8 hours a day. They're really good at it. And we're asking them to do this in a totally new way. And I think, it's certainly for me, took a kind of big dose of humility to be able to say that we have to work around people who are really good at what they do, who are used to a particular status quo, and who need to be, not only shown the value, but kind of, smooth over, reduce the activation energy that's needed to move from one paradigm to another paradigm. So fundamentally kind of designing for humans, building for humans, and need to create that seamless experience that has value that's worth it for them on the other side, make their lives easier, essentially.
It's so funny that you said that, David, because it's funny. I haven't worked in enterprise or provider side digital health in a while. I guess about 8 years ago now. Well, no, 5 years ago at Microsoft, and we did this. And it's funny, a lot of reasons haven't changed, right? You could have said like, oh, we've nailed how to address physician behavior change. But when I was one of the things that when I was doing it in Microsoft, it was about meeting physicians where they are and the way they worked, because behavior change was so hard, right? And so whenever we had to implement a new technology, or whenever we had to change, or whenever we had to think about how do we actually get this physician to change their workflow, it wasn't about brute force effort of being, oh, this is better, we're going to prove to you it's better, start doing this differently. It was about sitting and understanding with the physician, how do they actually do it today? What are the motions they do? Like, what do they log into? What do they swipe? What are the systems that they're logging into? How do they move from one side of the chair to another? Who do they interact with? We sat in hospitals to understand what are the ways physicians worked. And one of the observations we saw in our particular case was they use their badge a lot. They like to swipe, and they spent all their time in Epic. And so that was kind of the signal that said, you know what, we have to figure out a way to bring this with this enterprise IT application. We had to figure out a way how to enable single sign-on, and so they could use it after when they signed into one application, it was already there, right? How do we actually get it side by side? So it's just a different tab, and it didn't change their workflow that much. And so it goes to the idea that doctors are really refined humans and have a lot to do. And so they become really accustomed to behaviors. And so it's really hard to change behavior. And so a lot of times it starts with meeting them where they are, understanding their needs and how they work, rather than kind of brute force, this is better, change, because physicians don't work that way. It's really hard to drive change in the physician world.
I love everything that you guys said. I'll just share a little anecdote. About a dozen years ago or so, I was involved with rolling out a single sign-on across Johns Hopkins Medicine, and it was one of the few IT projects where we had units like lining up to get rolled out as soon as possible. So it's always a win if you're in the technology world and you can get a pull from your customer base to actually deploy technology. I think, you know, we kind of touched on a lot of the points that make use of technology in healthcare by physicians really hard. You know, interoperability of data, the myriad of systems they're using, the lack of continuity across those systems. They all sort of point to, you know, not human-centered design in a lot of ways. So I think there has been a lot of improvement, I should be clear, in the last, you know, 5 or 6 years, where we've seen much more human-centered, physician-centered, and humble approaches, humility taken and empathy taken in how design occurs. Still a lot of room to go, though. And at the end of the day, you know, the physicians don't want to be the slave to the computer, right? You know, I've heard many an anecdote of physicians who are writing notes well into the evening, long after their shift is over, because, you know, they have to, you know, navigate all the different systems and complete, you know, different work forms and whatnot. I think until we get to a point where the technology starts to blend into the background, we're going to continue to face this friction. And, you know, we've got to shift, especially on the vendor side, into much more human-centered design, understanding that you're part of an ecosystem and driving interoperability as much as we can.